Very excited to have Aishwarya here today with us, the founder and CEO of Brightland, which is an olive oil brand. I'm personally very excited because I found out about Brightland a couple of years ago, maybe 2 years ago, right when you started, and was obsessed and got it as a present. And I was initially intrigued by just the beautiful design. I mean, I can show you, I was so nerdy. I like found my bottle. But it's so beautiful. It's beautiful, the design, the branding. But the more that I learned about the company, there it goes so much deeper, and there's a whole scandal and fraud about the olive oil industry, which we will get into. But to get started, so for the next hour or so, the way that the hour is structured is we will start out by sharing Aishwarya's founder story, how she became the founder of this company. May I say, without a background in the food or beverage industry, and how that has helped her as an advantage. And then we did receive some pre-submitted questions when you registered, so we will cover those as well. And then the last 20 minutes, we will go over any questions that you have or any questions that come up for you during this hour. So yeah, without further ado, I have a list of questions to ask you, so we will get right started. Okay, Aishwarya, welcome. Thank you for joining us today.
Thank you so much for having me. I'm so excited to get to know everybody and to, hopefully my story will inspire, be helpful, and I'm here to help too.
I'm very excited for these founders to get to know you and get to know your story better. So let's get started. Okay, so I'm familiar with your story because I have listened to a couple of podcast episodes, but I want our founders to hear about your founder story of when you were living in New York. I believe at the time you didn't care much for olive oil. You were just like one of us, just using any brand of olive oil. But walk me through what happened and your experience that led you to wanting to create this company and product.
Yeah, to take a step back, I grew up in Houston, Texas. So I'm a Texan all the way, and then moved to New York City for college and was living in New York after college. And had a completely kind of different career than in food. I was working at a couple of tech startups, so kind of similar to the or understand the world of like being nimble and working at a small company, but was more on the marketing side. But candidly, I came from a family of super passionate home cooks, but I think when I moved to New York, I almost wanted to rebel against it a little bit. And so I decided to create this like spreadsheet of 600 restaurants and was just, like going out to eat every night. And then I think around year 8, like this was like 2015, I started cooking more. I was like, oh, I'm going to discover my kitchen. So started cooking more. And one thing I kept noticing was that both my partner and I kept getting these like awkward belly aches. And at first we thought it was bread, then we thought it was cheese, we thought it was spices. So we're cutting things out. And then a nutritionist friend of ours also mentioned, like, you should think about the cooking oil you're using. I've heard that could be a culprit. So then went down that rabbit hole. And at the time we were using olive oil, but like didn't know what brand it was, weren't even thinking about it. And that's when I discovered that basically like 60 minutes, like a bunch of kind of, there's been a bunch of research and a bunch of pieces around this notion that basically olive oil, there's more than 70% of it is rotten, rancid, it's been adulterated. There's a global amount of food fraud, and it's basically one of the most fraudulent foods in the world. And there's an entire kind of like category of fraudulent foods. So olive oil, there's some fraud in vinegar, there's fraud in spices, honey. So there's a lot of kind of foods that sit in this, but olive oil is the number one. And so I was like, this is insane. And I started asking friends, like, do you like olive oil? And everyone's like, oh my God, I love olive oil. It's so yummy. And I'm like, great. What brand do you use? And everyone's like, I have no idea. And then I was also asking, like, did you know that this fraud existed? And people are like, ew, that's like so disgusting. I had no clue. So it was those things kind of triangulating together that made me think, okay, I think there might be something here. And at first, since I didn't come from this like kind of tangible tactile product, I was thinking maybe I'll do a certification. Like I was kind of going on all kinds of directions of like creativity, I think. And then when we moved to California, I started visiting olive farms here and discovered like really wonderful farmers that are doing things organically with regenerative agriculture practices. But most importantly, it's the real deal. It's the actual product. And I also learned kind of what was important to look for when looking for like real olive oil, and how that impacts like the difference between real olive oil and something that's deemed fake, how that impacts like your health, your overall well-being, like all of those things. And so that led me down this like discovery kind of pathway of like, okay, I think there's something more here. And to be honest, I spent a lot of time thinking that I wasn't the right person to kind of like do this because I had built a different career. And so it was a lot of negative kind of like, why would anyone want to listen to me? I'm just this random lady. I'm not like an influencer chef. I'm not like a restaurateur. Like, why would anyone want to listen to me? Was really how I felt about it. I also didn't go to business school. So I was like, well, I'm not this like fancy Harvard MBA. So I don't have that either. And it was a lot of kind of the story that I was telling myself about myself that I needed to like reframe and reshape how I was kind of coming at my own story or my own journey. And that took a lot of time. That took over 18 months. Like I continued working a different job. I actually started like a consulting practice afterwards in the discipline that I was working for 10 years. And none of that had anything to do with this like Brightland thing. But I just kind of kept charging on basically with life, and eventually got to a place where I was like comfortable with making this decision and saying, you know what, this can be something that I can dive into. So that kind of whether it's like self-doubt or that kind of what we're truly afraid of, and that concept of fear, and thinking through that took a lot of time for me. And yeah, so like I said, 18 months ish. And then finally around like beginning of 2017, middle of 2017 was when I was like, okay, I'm gonna like really go down this path and start building, and decided that I wanted to like bootstrap to start. So what does that mean? Kind of had to think through, like, we didn't have all this money to just be like pouring into things. So had to be super laser focused on like, here are the two things that I think are important that we can put some of this money towards. And then we're just going to have to test and see. So that was a little bit of the like pre-launch journey. And I'm happy to, of course, like talk through, we haven't talked about like then what happened with launch, but like happy to talk through anything on that end.
I'm sure that's something that a lot of our founders can relate to. The founder mindset is just having doubt and fear and insecurities. I mean, as a founder, you struggle with it every day. So kudos for just, not giving up. And now we have this
Yeah.
beautiful product.
Yeah, there's actually a book that I recommend all the time, and I'll send it because it's been a couple of years. I should probably reread it myself, but I recommend that everyone reads it because it helps you reframe in your mind why you're afraid, and also reframes in your mind like this concept of what does failure even mean, so it just kind of helps you retool a lot of that thinking, and also puts you in this like, I believe that this capacity to be comfortable with the uncomfortable, or comfortable with the risks, like it's a muscle that can be built. I don't think that it's something that it's a mix of muscle plus privilege, right? Like there's some people who are just super privileged and can be really risky and can think in that like abundance mindset because their whole life is abundant, you know, whether it's the privileges that they've been afforded based on all kinds of a myriad of things. And then for a lot of other people, it is just building a muscle of like being comfortable with discomfort, and that takes time. But the more you do it, the more you just are like almost able to sit with that awkwardness and that feeling of it, and not feel like comfort and complacency are like really um uh, can go hand in hand, and can also like make you feel safe. Like humans want to feel safe. So constantly thinking outside of that safety like box or the like little like bubble that you want to create for yourself. And I just thought I want to click on this message. Thank you for mentioning privilege. Yeah, I mean the whole like I think I was pretty naive to that. Like I was like, oh, I'm gonna like bootstrap and do this. But like I came from some privilege in the sense that I had a 10-year career before that was well paying in technology. So I had money saved, I'm married, I have a partner who has a full-time stable job. So I was able to lean on my partner. Like there are privileges that I, you know, of course came from. And even then, I think I was still naive to the immense amount of privileges that entrepreneurship and entrepreneurs have, like miles more than what I even realized. And it's something that I had to kind of like sit with and get comfortable with, to know that like there are people that the way they think about risk taking is super different because they have like millions of dollars of trust fund like waiting for them, you know. And it's just the reality. So I think like knowing that that's existing, knowing that that is like a lot of times the norm, but saying, you know what, here's where I sort of sit, and here's where I'm like what my risk profile is and what I feel comfortable with, and like taking step, like basing your decisions after that, like off of that, I think is the only way to do it. Because otherwise you're looking at you're looking at someone being like, well, how come they got to open, I'm just making this up, how come they got to open this like amazing store in Abbot Kinney? Oh, their parent owns that building, that's probably why. And then you can end up feeling either super naive about it if you don't realize that, or B, once you realize it, go down this path of like, well, my parent doesn't do that, so like how am I ever going to do that? And so I think being realistic with like your risk taking ability even will be so just good. Like having healthy dose of optimism, naivete, but also understanding your own personal like risk profile, like I said, will just be so helpful and ground you in terms of the decisions you can make. And just know that like there are some things like we are not going to have that store on Abbot Kinney, you know, for a very long time or ever. That's just not something that's going to be happen for us. And like, cool, but what are other things we can do to get super crafty and creative? Yeah, so that was a very real thing, and I'm always happy to talk more about that because it was a mind fuck for me, I will say.
This is very refreshing to hear. And one of the many things that I really appreciate about you and I find very inspiring is your ability to openly talk about some of these topics that are not talked about as much as they should, like
Yeah.
privilege or you know, just the view and perspective of being a female founder. There's a whole list of topics I wanted to make sure that we cover as well. But if anyone who's on this call has any questions that are coming up or things that you just want to learn more about, feel free to put them in the chat and we'll address them as well as we go through.
Yeah, please ask.
Yeah.
Like this is the real, it is the real. And I think it's so important to have some naivete because you don't want to know everything and you don't want to see everybody's story, like too many people's story, because then you're just like bogged down with like, oh my God, all these people have these experiences. So you have to like really tune into yourself and have it come from within. But it's also slightly important to know that like there's a reason why company A somehow like has 5 stores the year they launch, and you're like, how is that possible? Like, how can you do that? There's probably an underlying reason why, or there's a reason. There's it's very multi-layered, and just kind of knowing that, accepting it, sitting with it, and then being able to move forward afterwards is a process.
So a couple of questions I have, and hopefully I'll remember them all. Question number one, what was the book that you recommend, if you
Yeah,
remember?
I need to I used to talk about it all the time, so let me message
Yeah,
it
you
to you
could send it to me.
to remember.
Question number two, and this isn't a question per se, but more so just a thought that came up for me um, is, as you talked about failure and like risk taking, that looks very different in the corporate world. Like failure looks very different in the corporate world than when you're running your own startup, because failure in one way or another happens all the time when you're a startup founder, and you have to get comfortable with it, versus when you're in this corporate environment, it's just a whole different dynamic. And I think that's something that a lot of founders struggle with when they transition, leaving the corporate world to being a founder. And you put so much value and worth, like your own value, to your company. And when something doesn't
Yeah.
go well, it's like it's a reflection of yourself when it's not, you know?
Yeah, and I think there's a time and place to put some of that. You want to be responsible with, like, if you take funding, like, you want to be responsible with other people's money, like, you want to be responsible with your own money if you self-funded, or friends and family, of course. So all of those moments are times, I think, to be like extra diligent and kind of like know that there is that pressure on you, and like have a healthy amount of pressure on yourself, because otherwise, if you're like la di da, like, that's not healthy. But I think there's also a time and place to not let some of that, you just have to keep going. Like, there are moments where, someone who you really wanted to hire may not want to join your company, or something that you thought was really going to work may not work. Or I don't know, you do a photo shoot and you're like, I don't love these photos. Like, this feels a little bit like a failure. Rather than just like, oh my goodness, where are we going to go? I think it's just really like, okay, not great. I need to do something to kind of like decompress, and then come up with the solution and keep moving. And also know that, like, that photo is not an indication of you. And that person not joining is not an indication of you. And like, really kind of maybe looking at yourself in the mirror and being like, my company is its own separate entity, and I'm not my company. And I tell myself that all the time. And I don't think Brightland is me at all. Like, and that could also be a function of, like, I worked for 10 years, so like, I'm not in my early 20s to really feel so like I am Brightland and it's my personality and me. Like, I feel like it's a part of me, but I definitely don't feel this oh my God, it's end all be all. Like, I feel quite separated. And so, however you can kind of like work through that over time, I think like separating yourself a little bit will be so healthy, because then you can also get a good night's sleep, and like also be able to be creative and keep moving forward, and think in a place of abundance rather than scarcity. Like, oh my God, it's so tied to me, and it's me, like that. That makes, at least for me, it makes me feel like you see my physical, like what I'm doing, I'm almost like going inward rather than being like expansive. um but then again, look, like, there are also, we live in an era of like, people say like the founder and their company are like this. So when you hear that word or sentence, if that's giving you energy, you're like, I am, and that's how I want to present myself to the world and also embody that. If that's giving you that energy, then like lean into that, kind of lean into what makes you feel energized, if that makes sense.
So one of the questions, or we've been receiving a lot of these questions, is about the branding and the design of it, which we can go into. But I had a question, or something that I wanted you to share, is actually the bottle and the bottle itself. So I feel like I'm like doing an advertisement for Brightland. Um, but first of all, not only is the design beautiful, but there's also a practical reason why it's this shape, why it's a bottle, why it looks like this. This was one of the most fascinating reasons for me when I learned more about olive oil and your story of how olive oil should ideally be stored. And if you could share a little bit about that, because when I heard about it, I was like, okay, never going back to the clear bottles ever
Yeah.
again.
Olive oil's biggest enemies are light, heat, and air, and that contributes to this like rancidity that's rampant in the olive oil world. And basically what I did was I went to any kind of like supermarket, kind of, whether it was like mass or like specialty, went to the Goop store, it was just going everywhere that wellness and food and like these kinds of products were. And I would just watch people buy. I would watch people like, I would like either have my phone or like a notebook and like take notes on how people were kind of making purchase decisions and just kind of like watch them. And one thing that I kept seeing was that everyone just looked very like uninspired, and everything on the shelf looks the same. Like even at the Goop store, which is supposedly super, curated and all this stuff, like the olive oil they were carrying at the time was like so bad and just not, it was like no one was excited about it, no one was like, oh, this looks nice, interesting. And so for me that was like okay, how can we get people to be interested in this idea that olive oil should be fresh, that it should be from like the most recent harvest, like all of the like educational components. You can't hit people over the head over it. Like people get bored, right? They're like, I get it, I don't care. So you have to come up with a way to like make people either remember or get excited. And so for me it was, let's do that via design. Like that's our form of storytelling. And so the bottle is a glass bottle, but it's UV protected with coating. So that way it protects the oil from light. And I knew from the beginning that I wanted it to be white. Like that was something that I had in my mind. And so, we kind of like took it from there from a design standpoint. But yeah, design can be used as like such a great tool, right? Like it can be used as a way to educate. It can be used as a way to kind of incentivize. It can be used as a way to, I think, delight and kind of bring people one step closer to that education front. So we decided to really like have it be a really, really big part of our foundation.
Do you have any tips for founders who are still trying to figure out their branding or are trying to figure out what works? Because I know, for example, for the colors for you, it was a lot of inspiration from just based on the product and based on like the harvest theme and things like that. But do you have any practical tips
Yeah.
on how founders can get started?
Yeah. So for Brightland, it was going to the California farmers market specifically, and the colors came from like the pink in like, when I saw whether it was like pink, purple, like kind of cauliflower, like seeing those kinds of fruit and vegetables and the color of produce was so exciting. And so that ended up kind of translating into our like brand colors. I mean, I think it's interesting to look outside of the industry that you're going in, like go to the museum if you can, I know it's COVID, so that doesn't help, but like, or, with the pandemic, but like look at industries outside of your own. So if you're going into beauty, maybe look at food or look at apparel or, footwear. If you're going into food, look at beauty, look at like, art. I think that is so, so awesome. And look at like things from throughout time, look at things historically, look at things that maybe could be kind of futuristic, and then kind of dial it into yourself again. Like don't spend too much time. What I didn't do, and I'm so glad I didn't do it, was look at what other brands in our industry or even in food were doing. I just was like, just not even going to look at that. And I'm so grateful for that because we were able to build something that was kind of like it over here rather than being all in this So I really highly recommend, whether it's a consumer product or even it's a, whether it's an app or anything, look at things outside of that immediate kind of lens. And there is so much inspiration, like really wonderful inspiration out there. Like, maybe invest in a couple of like art books and kind of like go through them and make tabs. Maybe go on like a local trip, even like go to Joshua Tree or go to Santa Barbara and just like walk around and just sort of like take it all in. And then look at, like, a lot of people are inspired by nature. Like, you could even go to kind of different types of sort of climates where you're looking at the sunset, looking at the sunrise, taking like kind of advantage, or kind of taking stock of the colors that you see. So all of those things can be helpful. Don't spend too much time on Instagram looking at other brands. It's just not, like, it doesn't help. It makes you feel blah. It makes, no matter what, or you end up weirdly copying, like people copy because they're just like, I'm inspired by this, please do this. And then everything ends up looking the same. So really step outside of that if you can. And yeah, other industries, that's been like what I've looked at. And it's gotten harder and harder too, I will say, because then you feel like everything starts looking the same, And so anyway, I can keep going down that rabbit hole, but yeah. Yeah, definitely looking outside of your industry is really good.
And somebody asked, did you work with an agency or bring someone in? And I believe you worked with an agency when you started, but not sure if that has evolved since then.
Yeah.
But that was the first question. And the second question is about what percentage or slice of your budget is dedicated to like anything creative or branding related?
I mean, well, let me answer the first one. Yeah. So I didn't come from like a design background, but I did have like a point of view that I wanted to get across with the brand. So partnering with a branding agency, we partnered with a small agency in South Carolina called Stitch Design Company. And I think at the time it fit our budget and I wanted to invest in it. So it worked well for us. I think there are wonderful, talented freelancers out there that would like love to work with brands, that I think you just have to like be creative and kind of like look for some of those people that are up and coming. I think it's really easy to go to like a lot of the branding shops that all the startups talk about, and those are like hundreds of thousands of dollars. And I don't know. I mean, again, if you want to invest in that, you can, but that was certainly not an option for us. And we ended up working with this like wonderful team of women who helped us bring the brand, who helped me bring this brand to life. And so they really helped with the foundation. Like they helped me figure out like the font, the typography, the color palette, the kind of the visual direction we were going in. And so I had this like visual brand book. And so then like after we launched, for other things, like whether it was something quick we needed to create on Instagram, or a quick like card we needed to create, like a collateral piece, I could go to like a freelance scrappier designer and share them the brand book and kind of talk through, okay, this is what we're envisioning. And so that way that was like pretty cost effective. And in terms of the budget question, I should know this. I don't know the exact percentage, but I will say in terms of when we launched, our branding was the most expensive part of launch.
And I feel like it's paid off because it's the first thing that you see, it's the first thing that you notice, and it really stands out from like a dozen other, olive oil brands. Another founder asked if you could share a little bit more about the manufacturing and distribution process and any lessons that you've learned.
I'd love specific questions because I don't really know where to start with that. So I'm happy to answer specifics.
Yeah, Felicia, if you have any specific questions, feel free to unmute yourself, by the way. You can share those as well.
Around manufacturing, my question was with customizing your designs and what I've seen a lot is that there are kind of cookie cutter options, and those tend to be more expensive. So what ways you have, or what strategies for working with or finding manufacturers that are willing to be more flexible and less cookie cutter?
I think it's not apples to, I think I know what you're talking about. And for us, we're a food, like agriculture, we're a product of agriculture. So we work with farmers, we don't work with manufacturers. So I don't, it's a little bit difficult for me to answer that. Yeah.
Yeah, I guess that means like you're sourcing your bottles and you're someone's like printing it and
Oh, the bottle side. Yes, yes,
yeah,
yes.
yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, look, like that was a cost for us. Like so basically we knew that the bigger we got, the better pricing we'd end up getting. And so it was really understanding that and knowing that, like when we launched, honestly, we launched with 1,000 bottles because I was like, I have no idea if 1,000 people are even going to buy this thing. Like I have no clue. And I don't want to sit there with 10,000 bottles behind me and be like, what happened? Right. So we launched with 1,000 bottles, and like that was expensive because we didn't get like great pricing on the bottles, on the labels, anything. But I would rather start that way and slowly, step by step, build up. But understanding from your manufacturer or from a vendor or partner like that, okay, if we buy 1,000 to 5,000, what is the pricing? If we buy 5,000 to 10, what is the pricing? So kind of understanding where you get price breaks, that's super helpful.
Yeah, thank you. That's helpful. I think the mindset of knowing that you're going to pay more at the beginning and that's just part of it.
The reality of it. Yeah, exactly. Like I think it's just being comfortable with like knowing that this is your beta or your time to even test this concept out and to truly learn and understand. And you're not in the business at that point. Your goal is not to get like scaled pricing. Your goal is to understand, what do customers think about this? How can I iterate on it? Do people want to buy it again if it's something that is repeat purchase? What is their behavior around it? How can I learn from my customer? Who is my customer? And then once you understand all of that, and if signs are pointing on the up and up, then it's like, okay, now we want to, instead of buying 1,000, we're ready to buy 5 or 10 or 100, whatever that is.
Right. So then you're prioritizing that knowledge versus like your
Precisely.
profit margin, right?
Precisely. Yeah. It's always a trade-off, and there's like time and place to, it's like almost like the discovery process of like, during this time, what do you truly want to learn right now? And then kind of taking it step by step after that.
Got it. That's helpful. Thank you.
Of course.
This is a fun question that we got. What are some of the biggest mistakes financially or operationally or anything you made early on with Brightland?
Oh my God, so many. One was, so with our, originally with our label, it was a wraparound label. And I thought that the design agency, the branding firm, was the expert in figuring out the label like type, but they're not. Their expertise is branding and design. But I was like, oh, great. Like they said they would source it, they're going to do it. And I never had the bottle and the label talk to each other, in the sense that I never did like a sample test run. So we were about to launch, like we were like a week from launch, and something that I invested in was a food PR person, because my background was in PR and communications, but I worked with like fintech and non-product consumables, but I understood the power of it. And so I knew I wanted to, but I had no contacts at like, Food and Wine magazine or whatever. So I brought on like a food publicist to help with that so that we could have a splashy launch. And so we got this like secured thing we secured something in the New York Times in the style section, and a week before launch we found out that the labels were totally bumping and like just horrible looking on the bottles and we didn't have time to fix it. So when we launched, I spent most of my time trying to like scratch off like bumps, and we're sending these to like I saw that like the somebody like a president of Four Seasons Hotel was like ordering, and I'm like making sure the bottle like it was such a disaster. So one of my biggest pieces of feedback is if you have a like a tactile, tangible product, like have samples beforehand. Make sure that like even if you think that, I don't know, there's going to be a bow that's going to be tied, like test that out a couple times and really have it dialed in before you do like a big launch. So that was a really, really big mistake. And that was a function of like me wanting to move really quickly. So I think you have to always marry that like moving quickly, like being nimble mentality to also like your fundamentals also have to be okay. That was like our product is our fundamental. And I tried to like shortcut it by being like, oh great, well we know the oil is amazing. This all is gonna look amazing. And like I was just leaned into that too much. So that was a big lesson.
That's such an interesting. I can just visually see you there, and that sounds so stressful. That's a big and
I have
it's
another
something
one.
so simple.
Yeah, I have another
Like you
one.
would think that but then when you're actually going through it, like,
Totally.
what's the
And
other one? I want to hear about it.
the other one is also important if you have a physical product. We didn't spend that much time testing shipping. So like I sent it to my sister in New York and then my parents in Texas once, and then had them send it back or open it and take a picture, and it looked fine. So we're like, oh great, this is all good. But we had sent it via USPS, but when we launched, I think we like launched with UPS, but I didn't realize that the shipper, like who you ship with makes a big difference in how it arrives. So when it was like when the bottle started arriving to people, they would like Instagram or they would open it, and the packaging we had used at the time was like ripping. The bottles didn't break, but it was ripping. And so you like open it and your experience, you have this like ripped situation inside. Like that doesn't look cute, And it was too late. I had bought like 1,000 of the like inserts, and like I had to kind of figure out something. So, we put in like kind of like different paper wrap and whatever. But had we tested it properly, we would have probably known not to do that.
Another question is, do you have any, or what are your biggest hurdles that you're facing right now at your current stage where your company is, like anything that you're dealing with like this week or last week? And what lesson have you learned from scaling your company up?
I think right now it's just really like we've been a remote team, and it's been fine, but I definitely like it's coming up on a year plus, and it just kind of feels there's team members I've never met before, and just sort of feeling, I think everyone feels kind of like fatigued and feeling like, how do you truly build a remote work culture? Like, how do you make sure people feel really inspired? And just, yeah, what do you like, how do you kind of build, and where do we go from here is sort of the stuff that I'm thinking about.
We are, I was like, is she reading my mind? Because we're going through the exact same thing with the pandemic. We've gotten a couple of new team members, and we've never met them in person. So it's definitely something that a lot of us are experiencing these days. Somebody is asking how big your team is now, maybe compared to when you started.
Yeah, when we started, it was me and an intern. And then we evolved into me and a couple of interns. Then we evolved into me, an intern, and a couple of part-time people who were helping pack boxes. And then we evolved into me and our first full-time hire. And then we evolved into me and 2 full-time hires. And then we evolved into me, 2 full-time hires, and an intern. And now we have 6 of us full-time.
Wow. Come a long way. It's very exciting. Um, Something that I want to go back on, which we touched on earlier in the conversation, is idea of separation between yourself as the founder and then your company as a brand. Could you talk a little bit about like how do you build a brand for your company but also keep yourself separated? I know that you have, or most recently had your own experience of how it ties into your own relationship with social media and how like you personally don't post as much, but you kind of have to for your brand. Like, how do you navigate that?
Yeah, for me, it was really like, I think that posting on social media or having to be this like public facing founder is a tax that female founders have to pay. I don't see male founders who are like, who have food or lifestyle, you know, these kinds of companies, cookware. Like one of my friends is a cookware company founder. He doesn't even have an Instagram. And he's not like, here I am being the modern Martha Stewart, like on a Tuesday afternoon, I'm going to show you this like omelet I made with the pan that, you know, like, he's not trying to do that. He's just building his company. And so really like for me, that was a big awakening. Like, what am I doing? Like, why am I doing this on a, you know, Monday afternoon when we have so much more to be doing? And so, understanding that, getting comfortable with it. And again, it depends on what energizes you. For some people, I have friends who are, you know, female founders who like, they love to be like, you guys, here's this denim jacket. What do you think? By the way, we're launching something new. And I can see that gives them joy. And like, if that's what gives you joy, then you should do it. For me, it has felt like a chore and it's felt like a tax and something that's awful. And so I decided that is not what I want to do. And I read a lot about like, does it actually lead to sales? Like, why are we doing it? And for me, like, I don't want to be an Instagram influencer. Like, I don't care about brands, you know, sponsoring me. And like, that's not my interest. For other people, that is a revenue. That is a way that people make money. That is a way, you know, so again, if that's the way, if that gives you energy, if that's a direction you want to go in, then I think you should lean into it. For me, it wasn't. So I've definitely decided that for me, it's telling our brand story through our Instagram, and I'll pop in and do that. That is the way that I'm gonna like channel that, if that makes sense.
And it also happens to be very aligned with what you're trying to do and with like the underlying mission of Brightland, which is to just, you know, take a breath, be more present, like enjoy like a home cooked meal. Like it's kind of like this anti, you know, being on your phone, like having to photograph everything, having to document everything, you know. So it seems to be very aligned. We got another question. Do you ever talk about the health benefits of olive oil in your marketing and social media? And do you use evidence-based stats? This female founder is trying to figure out what a consumer audience wants or needs in terms of statistics because it's easy to overkill.
Yes, we absolutely have. And I think people more than ever are excited to learn. I think they want to learn though in like, and this is kind of messed up, but they want to learn in like a digestible, but also in an Instagram friendly way, if that makes sense. They want everything to be like kind of like designed in a certain way, which is like funny and also just the reality. So I think, you know, looking at like, I actually think like Seed, which is this like probiotic company, has done an amazing job of that. So I would definitely look at them for maybe some inspiration. I think we've done an okay job at it, but yeah, I think that people are hungry for like information and to learn. I think doing it with statistics and leaning forward with facts is the right way to do it. But remember, try to kind of put yourself in their shoes. Like, what are maybe the top 2 or top 3 things? Or maybe here's like the two numbers that someone can kind of register in their mind. Because if you're like 70% and then 45% and then 90%, and that comes from the University of Miami, and this comes from the Atlantic, and that comes from, people are going to be like, I don't even know what's going on. So I think making it like digestible, I think people are craving that. And whether that's visually digestible, or if you're the founder and you're excited about, you know, sharing that yourself, coming on board and saying, hey, I'm like, you know, I'm really excited about sharing this, and here are a few things, like that could be powerful too.
Isn't this all, I feel like there's a story for this. Isn't there also a lesson that you learned along the way about specifically this, and transitioning from more of like a doom and gloom kind of like, do you know what's in your olive oil, to like a more optimistic, like inspiring viewpoint? Do you have any lessons to share with that?
Yeah, I mean, I think that for us, like, we didn't want to do the fear mongering tactic too much, because that doesn't come from a positive place. And people immediately are coming in from, like, they're being introduced to your brand with something negative in mind, even if it's not about you. And so I think for us, that was the kind of the mentality that we took.
And then there is a question about your ad spend or strategy for Brightland. What's provided the most solid returns for you? Any specific platforms or media types that you've found to be very helpful?
Well, for the first like year and a half, we barely spent anything. We didn't do much digital advertising at all, because I really wanted to let the like brand foundation sink into place, and didn't want to just be like a random Instagram brand and everyone's like, who is this? Is this sketchy? Like, it's weird. So that's why we invested in press to start. It was also a channel that I really understood. And so we got to see how that converted, like how that did. And then we started layering in other things. And so, yeah, for the last like year or so, we've like, you know, actually like invested in paid media. And I think that it's ever changing. Like, I've heard that brands that launch now, that's not necessarily a luxury that they can do, and they kind of have to lean into it from the get-go. I've also learned that, or heard that that it's changing, it's ever changing. And like, you know what, even from a paid standpoint, where Facebook was 6 months ago, it's different now. So now we're like testing some direct mail and some other things. So I think we're certainly learning step by step too. Like, I wouldn't ever want to prescribe something to another brand, because I think every brand is unique. Every kind of situation is really unique. And the times that we're living in, what worked in 2017 did not work in 2019. And what worked in 2019 is not working in 2021.
And Abby is asking a question. She's saying, I've seen Brightland do some great collaborations with other brands. What is the best way to approach other brands?
Oh yeah, I love this question, because I love collaboration so much. So I think there's like a kind of a big world in collaboration. So like, you can do something as simple as, you know, like, let's collaborate and do a giveaway, or let's collaborate and do like come out with a piece of content together, whether it's like we do a branded shoot together, or we do you know, if it's food, like a recipe together or something. And then there's the like, oh, let's come out with like a product or something like that. And I think first, taking a step back, thinking about who are your dream brands and really why, not just like, I love Patagonia because they're an amazing company. Okay, well, like what would you really want to do with them? And kind of digging within again and writing out like, what are some dream specifics you'd want to do. And then I think it's a matter of like, after that, getting in touch with them and trying to see if you can hop on a call to talk about collaborations, and or starting small, like saying would love to start by doing, a giveaway, and going above, being the brand, since you're asking, kind of going above and beyond to be like, we'd be happy to like ship all the product. We want to make it simple, kind of showcasing that you're you're ready to go above and beyond, and they're kind of then getting to know you as a person. We've noticed that the brands that have been the most excited to collaborate with us, and vice versa, are when me or someone on my team ends up getting to know that other person a little bit. So it's just such a human to human interaction rather than a brand to brand interaction. And that's been really helpful. But I think what's also really important is to come to the table with ideas. Hey, this might be a long shot, but we've been thinking about this and we think this could be really amazing. What if we did I'm making this up. What if we came together and did a dinner together? We would be so happy to think through these things. We'd love if for you guys, all you have to do is this and this, but would love to talk through what that could potentially look like. So as specific as possible, because we get asked a lot by brands to collaborate, and we've been okay, what do you have in mind? And they're like, I don't know, just would love to get to know you and collaborate. And that's just not, that doesn't go anywhere. So we've noticed when brands come to us and have, hey, we love, we noticed you guys are doing, we noticed that you just launched a garlic oil, and we would love to do something in the summer with you around, I'm making this up, around, picnics. So we have this picnic blanket company, let's do something together. So that's really cool because they've actually thought through.
That's such a good piece of advice. Let's do your research, come prepared, and go above and beyond, especially in the beginning, to really build a strong relationship. Because I'm sure you want it to be a long-lasting relationship beyond just one event or one partnership.
Yeah.
One question that I have is, if you could share a little bit more about things that you've experienced or obstacles that you've faced in terms of the differentiation between being a female founder versus a male founder. I know earlier you mentioned even within social media, you see it where there seems to be this added pressure for female founders to show up and be your own brand and present as this persona. But are there any other challenges that you've had to overcome that you feel like other founders did not face?
Yeah, certainly. One example is who's this random South Asian Indian lady showing up to olive farms? Everyone's white, everyone mostly is a man, and people, and I have a weird name, unusual name. People didn't even answer my emails. People definitely were looking at me when I with worried eyes. I sort of used that to my advantage, though. I just asked a lot of questions and pretended to be oh, I'm doing a project, I want to learn more. And that ended up actually helping, because they didn't perceive me as anything, and certainly not as not a threat, but a, seriously. So I ended up actually learning more and gaining more insight in some ways than maybe not. And then of course, with fundraising, most of the people that you talk to are white men. So there's that kind of reconciliation about oh, wow, these are the people that have a lot of money and are making these decisions, and kind of I surround myself with a lot of women and POC founders. And so I kind of live in this lovely bubble of all of us helping each other, and then during the fundraising time, I stepped out of it and was oh, wow, that is certainly not where a lot of the power lies. So to kind of, yeah, it's jarring, and it's also, it makes you wonder, they'll ask you what school did you go to? Or like, the fact that I'm from Texas, like I've had investors assume that I went to like private schools, and I didn't. I went to a public school. And just, you just see things like that where you're like, okay, yeah, you wish, and there's almost like a wishing that I fit a certain box, or that people fit certain boxes. That makes the other person feel comfortable to write that check. Yeah. So you see all of that. Yeah.
And the reason why I ask is because the majority of the people who are on this call are female founders. About 70% of the founders that we work with are female founders and underrepresented founders. So, these are things that we talk about every week. These are real, situations, and we do our best to support founders through these situations. Do you have any advice, like practical advice, or even in terms of mindset, like how to get through that, or things to help you through those tougher moments? Yes, outside of Grid 110.
Yeah, I was about to say, like, having your personal network of people who are like cheering you on, championing you. I think for me, it was sort of like I knew I couldn't like show up with nothing but a deck and be like, I'm just gonna raise $3 million with nothing. Like, I had to do the bootstrapped thing and show proof. And even then I felt like the proof was never enough, and like you're kind of going through those motions. And then I guess getting to a place where I started meeting the investors that got it, which was itself like its own journey. And I think it's just really, for me, it's like a mental health game and a mental game of just, yeah, I don't think I have a good answer to this, honestly. Like, I think it's so personal, right? Like, you have to kind of, again, come from within and recognize that unfortunately the world is still like that. And so what can you do, and what can you do to kind of keep charging forward? So maybe it's just some of that like gusto and gumption. Maybe it's how can you like try to position yourself as an advantage, and ultimately not let it like kind of, because it is so overwhelming that it can almost like take you aback, if that makes sense. I'm sure everyone's kind of felt that way, where it feels so daunting. So I don't think I have a great answer to that.
That is totally fine. We have about 5 minutes left. If anyone else has any last questions or burning questions, feel free to put them in the chat. You can also unmute yourself and ask your question. But we will go over any final questions that you might have.
Hey, Aish, this is Allison Greenberg. I just had a quick question, unless somebody else has a burning one. It's not burning, but I do think it's important. Anyone else? Okay, so as a female founder in women's health, I work with a really particular set of female founders, and most of them, I would say an overwhelming majority of them, are so supportive, and none of us see each other as competitors, because our competitor is bad health outcomes. So my question for you is, like, in the consumer packaged goods space, there is probably much more intense competition, and I'm just curious, from your perspective, how can female founders better show up for one another? Thank you.
I mean, really, like, I think, again, you have to come from a place of abundance. The minute you have a scarcity mindset, you're viewing everyone and everything as competition, right? Everything is noise. So you can like walk around kind of looking at the world like that, being like, everything, you're competing with everyone for attention and noise. You can think of the world like that, or you can be like, well, the world is huge and there's so many opportunities and there's so many people out there, and I'm carving out my space in this that's unique and differentiated and special, and like, you know, I'm gonna also meet founders along the way, or I'm gonna meet companies along the way that I'm aligned with and, you know, kind of jazz with and jive with. And then I might also meet some folks along the way that I, you know, we don't really like jive that much, but, you know, to each their own, you do you, and wishing you well, and kind of moving on. I don't prescribe to the, like, just because we're female founders, like we all, like everyone needs to be friends with every female founder under the sun. I think that it's more nuanced than that. But I do think that, like, coming from a place of just feeling abundant will change the game and the mindset of how you approach basically every relationship and every decision you make in your business.